Now, the UK Supreme Court dominated headlines earlier in the day. It ruled by a margin of 8 to 3 that the Prime Minister, Theresa May, must get parliamentary approval before she begins Britain's formal exit from the European Union. Now, the judicial body dismissed the government's argument that the Prime Minister could simply use executive powers granted to that office, known as the royal prerogative, to invoke Article 50 of the EU's Lisbon Treaty and start 2 years of divorce talks. However, the court rejected arguments that the UK's devolved assemblies in Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales should give their assent before Article 50 is invoked. The Prime Minister has repeatedly said she will trigger Article 50 before the end of March, but she will now have to seek the consent of lawmakers before she does so. Last week, the Prime Minister set out a stall for negotiations, promising a clean break with the world's largest single trading bloc.
Today, by a majority of 8 to 3, the Supreme Court rules that the government cannot trigger Article 50 without an Act of Parliament authorising it to do so. When the UK withdraws from the EU treaties, a source of UK law will be cut off. Further, certain rights enjoyed by UK citizens will be changed. Therefore, the government cannot trigger Article 50 without Parliament authorising that course.
Let's take a little deep into that story. Richard Bestick joins me now live from London with more data on this story. Richard, earlier today, Nicola Sturgeon, Scotland's First Minister, she said, quote, "Is it better that we take our future into our own hands?" End of quote. Given today's ruling, is another independence referendum in Scotland essentially a foregone conclusion?
Well, Rama, probably not a foregone conclusion, but Nicola Sturgeon's words are a measure, perhaps, of the strength of feeling that exists inside the government of Scotland. 2 points here. One, that opinion polls suggest winning an independence vote can't be assumed by the Scottish nationalists, and circumstances have also changed since the last independence vote. The price of oil, for example, a mainstay of the Scottish economy, has crashed, which raises fresh questions over whether Scotland would be a viable entity on its own. But just because an independence vote isn't a certainty doesn't mean Scottish members of the UK Parliament can't cause problems for the government here in London. The leader of the Scottish nationalists says her forces down south will table 50 amendments. 50 amendments of what they say are serious and substantive issues. The government, with its tight deadline, though, will regard that more as an attempt to thwart the will of the people from that Brexit referendum, Rama.
Indeed. This ruling from the Supreme Court also made it clear that the government did not have to consult these devolved governments in deciding whether or not to trigger Article 50. I mean, why is that the case when these areas will clearly be affected by whatever decision is made in Westminster?
Well, the government doesn't have to, but it can if it wishes. The view of the Supreme Court judges was, though, that the UK ministers aren't legally compelled to consult the devolved parliaments because relations with the European Union are a matter for the UK government. The Scottish nationalists have demanded all the devolved administrations be treated as equal partners. And Nicola Sturgeon, claimed that that assurance was given. We'll see if it's forthcoming, but the reality is the British Parliament is paramount and the government doesn't have to consult Scotland, Wales or Northern Ireland.
Indeed, some pretty interesting times ahead there. We'll have to leave it there for the time being. Thank you for that. That's Richard Bestick. He was live, of course, in London. Now,